So one of the most pernicious lies in the synth world is that FM synthesis is difficult to understand, and that's not true. It's really not difficult to understand. It just is specific, you know, and it's like nobody really teaches you exactly what you can do with it. They just kind of, there's not that many, in fact, there's no like straightforward tutorials on just how to actually implement FM synthesis. When I was trying to learn FM synthesis, most of the videos, the overwhelming majority of the videos that I saw on YouTube were just explanations of what it is on like the basic level, and really that's a very easy thing to understand. I think that most content creators like have an FM synthesis video because it's easy content and it makes them feel smart. What I wanted to do is make a video where I skip over all of the basic stuff of using a slow LFO and then speeding it up until it sounds like a timbre instead of a siren. So if you don't understand that's the premise of FM synthesis, then I would suggest go find one of the numerous videos online that explain that. But instead, I wanted to do a video showing you how to actually use it with some practical advice on how to make patches and stuff. So yeah, this video is aimed at beginners, but this should be the second video on FM synthesis you watch instead of the first one. It's really not much more difficult than like subtractive synthesis. You have the VCO, VCA, and VCF, and you can get a lot of mileage out of those three simple components. And FM synthesis really isn't more difficult than that in its basic form. It gets deep, but when you know what to do, when you know how to start, it's really not that difficult. And I formulated in my mind that the best way to teach, the best way to learn FM synthesis is to understand the two operator structure very thoroughly. You may have the impression that two operator FM is like lame, I guess, because it goes so much more deep than that, than just the two operator structure. But two operator FM is the most pure form of FM. You know, the reason why they had 6 operators in the original Yamaha FM synths is because with all that flexibility, you can make emulations of real world sounds, and you can do that fairly easily with, you know, make uncanny trumpets and shit with a DX7. But with two operator FM, it can only ever sound like FM, and that's why I really like two operator, because I like the way that FM sounds. Once you understand how two operator works, everything else is going to come way easier. So I would imagine that 80% of understanding FM is in understanding the two operator structure. So that's what I'm going to try and teach today. So I know that I said that I wasn't gonna, you know, go over the basic premise of FM synthesis, but I will dive a little bit into FM theory because it's necessary. So FM synthesis, a lot of people call it a form of additive synthesis. I don't think that's accurate. I think it just is confusing because yeah, I don't like calling it a form of additive synthesis, even though you are generating more harmonics instead of taking them away. But you know, the point of FM is to generate sidebands around the frequency that your fundamental frequency that you're starting with, and those sidebands are just peaks in the spectrum. Each one of them is a sine wave that gets added on top of the fundamental frequency. So I just wanted to clarify here that it's not literally adding sine waves on top of the fundamental, which would in fact be additive synthesis, but instead it's the harmonic frequencies are generated by altering the phase of the waveform. So it's calculated from the time domain, not the frequency domain, as they would say. And that's how you get the more harmonically rich sounds. Those sidebands aren't necessarily in the harmonic series, but when your modulator is an integer multiple of the fundamental frequency, then all of your sidebands will be in the harmonic series. So that will give you a harmonically coherent sound, and it won't confuse the pitch of the patch. Okay, so I have here a 2-operator max patch with just one modulator and one carrier. And I just wanted to demonstrate two really important principles. Pretty much what all of it boils down to, and that would be modulation amplitude and the ratio of the modulator to carrier. So as you increase amplitude, that's what generates more harmonics. And as you increase the ratio, that's what spreads those harmonics out from each other. So between those two parameters are pretty much all the timbral variation that you can get in FM synthesis. So it's pretty simple, right? But let me just demonstrate it really quick. So I have a 1-to-1 ratio, and I'm going to bring up the amplitude a bit. So you saw on the spectroscope that more peaks in the spectrum are being generated. So now I'm going to increase the ratio with the amplitude high and see what that sounds like. So you could see in the spectroscope that it's the same number of harmonics, but they're just being spread out more. And higher ratio settings are kind of how you get those bell tones. And lower ratio settings are kind of your bread and butter FM sounds. So yeah, you can kind of think of amplitude as, if you're going to compare it to subtractive synthesis, the amplitude is kind of like your filter cutoff frequency. The higher the setting is, the more harmonics you're going to have, and the lower the setting is, the less. So it's kind of like, it's kind of like turning a filter knob. But of course it sounds nothing like a filter. So yeah, I wanted to show you that, and then something else really quick. I have this parameter set up, and it's the exact same thing as ratio, except it doesn't move in integer multiples. It just goes from 1 to 16 freely. So let's listen to that. It sounds really quick. So it sounds like shit, but that is basically the same exact thing as a ratio. It just might be a little clearer what's going on. How as you bring up the modulator frequency, it's going to spread out the harmonics. So yeah, I just wanted to demonstrate that really quick. Those two parameters are pretty much where all of FM synthesis lies. And it's pretty simple, right? Once you learn like how it changes the sound when you alter these two settings, then you basically understand FM synthesis. So now let's dive deeper into this two operator structure and show you what to do with it. Okay, so now we understand the basic principles of what amplitude and ratio do, and that is generate harmonics and then spread those harmonics apart. So now let's learn a little bit more about what you can expect with certain ratio settings and how to get certain sounds that you want. And I have FM8 for this just because it has a nice oscilloscope and then spectrum analyzer. And it's also just a great synth, but it's definitely very complicated for like a beginner person in FM, but you can get it for really cheap sometimes, so that's why I got it. Okay, so again, I have a 1-to-1 ratio, and I know now that as I bring up the amplitude level, it gives you more harmonics. But pay attention to the waveform, the way that it looks. As I bring it up a little bit, it kind of almost resembles a saw, and that's important because if you understand the basic wave shapes in analog synthesis, you know that saw waves give you even harmonics and odd harmonics, and square waves give you only odd harmonics. So you probably already understand the difference in timbre between those two waveforms. Square waves are often described as sounding kind of hollow, and same thing with triangle waves. So saw waves have even and odd harmonics, and square waves and triangle waves only have odd harmonics. So what can you surmise from the way that those waves look and the way that they sound? Well, the first thing you should probably notice is that square waves and triangle waves are symmetrical waveforms, and saw waves are not. they're asymmetrical. They go high at one side and then down to the other each cycle. So that's an important point, because as we saw with a 1-to-1 ratio, you get an asymmetrical waveform. So let's see what it sounds like when you have a 2-to-1 ratio. You get a symmetrical waveform, kind of like a square wave. So yeah, that's another important principle. When you use even ratios, you're going to only get odd harmonics, like a square wave, kind of counterintuitively. And when you use odd ratios, you're going to get even and harmonics, kind of like a saw wave. So that might be kind of difficult to remember because it's kind of reversed. With even ratios, you get odd harmonics, but I guess maybe that can be your mnemonic device, is that it's counterintuitive, so therefore even ratios equals odd harmonics. And you can see if I go up to a ratio of 3, same thing holds. The waveform is asymmetrical. And when I go up to a ratio of 4, the waveform again is symmetrical. So in order to learn FM, what you need to do is test out what these different configurations sound like with different ratios and different mod levels or amplitudes. And just see, like, if I do it just a little bit, how does it sound? If I do it a lot, how does it sound? If I do it at a really high ratio, how does that sound? And you'll kind of get a sense for how to use these different settings in certain applications. So for instance, if I'm making a bass sound, I'm pretty much always going to be using a low ratio, like 2-to-1 or 1-to-1. Let me do this. It sounds like it'd be good for a bass, right? Because you're retaining more definition in the low end. If you want to do a bell sound for whatever reason, even though I don't support it, you just go up to a ratio of 10 or something. But what you should do now is just test out these different configurations and see, what sounds good, what would sound good for what purpose, stuff like that. And you only need to think about 2 operator for now. I really like a ratio of 2-to-1 for bass sounds also. Yeah, a ratio of 2-to-1 makes a good bass sound too. 3-to-1, not really. I guess that's not bad. But these lower ratios are good for things like bass, basically. So yeah, if it helps you, you can kind of think about level as your filter cutoff frequency. Because the higher it is, the more harmonics you're going to hear, as is the same with opening up the cutoff frequency of a filter. So just between these 2 parameters, ratio and modulation amplitude, like I said, that's where all of the synthesis happens pretty much in FM synthesis. And just understanding just between those 2 parameters, what settings give you what kind of sounds, that's how you're going to come to really understand how FM synthesis at large works. Once you start moving into more operators, all of those rules, all those principles are still going to apply, but you'll have more flexibility in how you can implement them in different ways. Okay, so now let's talk about feedback. Feedback is an extremely important parameter in FM synthesis, and I hate it when FM synths don't have feedback, because it's just so much you can do with it. It's my favorite parameter in FM synthesis, probably. So let's listen to how it sounds when I just have just one sine wave, and I'm feeding it back into itself, into its own phase. So you saw it kind of starts to look like even more like a saw wave, right? It's not perfect though. It has these curves, and that's actually really important for phase modulation, because that makes a huge difference in phase modulation, whereas it wouldn't necessarily in frequency modulation. You should never, ever use an actual saw wave in a phase modulation synth, and every FM synth is phase modulation. Never use a saw wave. There's no point to it. But I think I want to do a video talking about the difference between phase modulation and frequency modulation, because there's some information to be explored that I don't think anybody's explored yet on YouTube. Okay, I need to add a caveat to this, because there are ways that you can make a saw wave sound good in FM, but in short, you can't just use a straight up saw wave because it won't sound good, and it has to do with the difference between phase modulation and frequency modulation, so that further makes me want to make a video on it. So I'll probably do that. But basically, you can use a really dull saw wave that has very limited harmonics, and you can make it sound pretty cool that way, but just a straight up saw wave, just don't do it. If you're ever going to program your own FM synth, just don't do it. But anyway, so it does kind of look like a saw wave though, right? What it's doing is, as the output of the operator that you're listening to goes back into itself, it kind of pulls its own phase backwards and sharpens it. This sharpening feature of it is basically the important part about feedback. If you dial it in a little bit, as you dial it in more, then it just becomes noise, which is a really important tool to have when you're designing sounds. But something to note with that is that it doesn't sound like white noise. It's kind of like a dynamic noise that's really sharp in the high end, but again, it's really, really nice to have when you're like making sounds with FM. So with this idea of sharpening the waveform in mind, and also with the idea of how to generate odd versus even harmonics in FM synthesis, we can now make a really convincing square wave and saw wave. So let's do the saw wave first. So I have the modulator, I'll set it to 1, and I'll start bringing that up to like that. And I can, in FM8, you can route anything anywhere basically. So I'm going to route the output of the carrier back into itself in a feedback loop. And that looks like a pretty nice saw wave. I mean, it's not perfect, but it is better than just feeding back one operator. When you have two operators, it kind of helps straighten things out a bit more. So there's a pretty convincing saw wave. This is an actual filter, not just a pretend filter. But yeah, if you're using FM in a subtractive hold on, can I just say, it's funny how Germans always say subtractive. Did you notice that? Like, they never say subtractive, they always say subtractive, and now I'm starting to say it because I watch so many German synth people on YouTube. But if you're using FM in a subtractive context, that's how you can make a saw wave. So now let's do the same exact thing but make a square wave. And to do that, we know that we need an even ratio. So let's increase it to a ratio of 2:1 and look at what that sounds like. So that's a pretty damn good square wave, to be honest. Like, it's obviously not perfect. It has these like little, inconsistencies, but it's definitely a square wave. And we can listen to that filtered also. So yeah, that's why it's important to understand this idea of different ratios giving you different kinds of harmonics. So whenever you would reach for a square wave instead of a saw wave, or vice versa, you could do the same thing here with a ratio of 1:1 versus 2:1. And you can almost get kind of a resonant filter type sound with feedback and the messing with the amplitude. I don't know. Definitely doesn't sound like a filter, actually. Actually, I think probably my favorite ratio setting is a ratio of 1 to 2. And we can do that by setting the modulator to 0.5. So it's basically, 0.5 to 1, you could think of it as. The frequency of the modulator is half that of the carrier. So let's listen to what that sounds like. It's super good for basses, really thick. And you can hear it like it decays into a higher frequency. And it sounds really good with some feedback. So you can almost get some like resonant filter type sounds with that. I just love the way that that sounds. So that's really good for basses. You could also go even lower, like 0.25, but that's a little too low in my opinion. Yeah, definitely too low for this. Let me put this up a bit. You kind of almost get like some formanty kind of sounds out of that. I just really like the way that sounds. It kind of almost like sounds like an uncanny valley resonant filter. So we're not looking at the scope, but you can kind of hear how with the feedback higher, it just has this kind of sharper, kind of high-end timbre to it. Like as if you were turning up the resonance on a filter sweep. So yeah, that's feedback, a very important tool in your toolbox. Probably just, the third tool in your toolbox. You really only need 3, ratio, amplitude, and feedback. And with those 3 things, that's pretty much where all of FM synthesis is done. That's where all the sound designing happens. And then of course envelopes, which just control and LFOs and stuff, which control the amplitude level over time. But once you have explored these 3 things, you'll be well on your way to understanding FM synthesis. And once you once you can predict what changes are going to make what kind of sounds, that's when you can start making executive decisions when you're sound designing with FM, and you won't just feel like you're wandering aimlessly. So yeah, that's feedback, my favorite parameter. Okay, now that you understand the 2 operator structure, I'm going to give you some advice on how to approach algorithms. I had this whole idea of what to do with this section. I was going to use one of my hardware synths, but it just was way too complicated. And I think that the best way to teach this is to just give some examples, but first I'm going to go over the basics of it. But really, it's just more of the same stuff. So you're more than halfway there to understanding it. So first I'm going to talk about 3+ operator stacks. So as you can see, the algorithm that we have selected here in operator is just a stack of 4. So these last 2, that's just the regular 2 operator structure that we're used to. And then we're going to add a third one on top of that. So this blue one, periwinkle, I think. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's like periwinkle. Okay, anyway. So let's start dialing in some modulation. Okay, that's fine. So, like I said, it's pretty much just more of the same thing. It sounds pretty much like how you would expect it to sound when you modulate a modulator. So let's just start dialing this in a little bit. So yeah, it starts to bring in more harmonics, more high end. So you can do it like this just for more harmonics, but I don't find that very useful. What I find stacks of operators like this useful for is basically varying the amount of modulation that these operators are doing over time. So it's basically just, using the envelopes. That's really mostly what FM synthesis is now that you understand the basics. It's just about understanding how you can use the envelopes to your advantage. So first, let's give the good old modulator a little bit of attack. So all I've done is just given the first modulator a little bit of attack, so it kind of swells in. And I'm going to just show how it sounds when I have a sharp attack on this one. This one is going to modulate the modulator fast, and this one is going to modulate the carrier slow. So let's just listen to how that sounds. What's nice about operator stacks like this is if you use a high ratio for the first modulator, let's do 8, and then use an operator with a low ratio to modulate the one with a high ratio. Yeah, I don't know. These examples aren't sounding very good because I'm not really in a mood. I'm not really in a mood to do all this. But the basic idea is just generating different types of harmonics with these different operators and doing it at different times. So, for instance, I can use an LFO on this one. Let's say. Let's try and turn this into a chord, actually. Yeah, so basically what I have going on is very simple. The first modulator is just at a ratio of 0.5 to 1. So it gives it kind of a richer bass. And then on this operator, which is modulating the modulator, I have the envelope up to full blast, and I'm just using the LFO to bring it in and out. I don't know, it sounded like it needed some echo. Basically, the idea is varying the amount of modulation from each of these operators at different times. And that's basically how it works in any algorithm, no matter what the configuration of it is, no matter what's modulating what. All you're dealing with when you look at algorithms, after you understand the basics of FM synthesis, then you're just trying to put those into the puzzle and you're trying to see what can I do with each of these operators to change the timbre over time. I feel like that's the most obvious thing. I don't even know if I'm doing this very, very well. It's gonna be better when I get into the examples. But anyway, so it's very simple. When you understand two operator, it starts to come more like intuitively what you can do with each of these operators in a stack. So let's talk about parallel operator stacks. I really like this kind of algorithm where it's just two stacks of 2. So you have one set of 2 operators and then another set of 2 operators. So let's reset all this shit. Okay, so according to this algorithm, we have B modulating A and then separately D modulating C. So I'll make this group do something interesting, and then I'll have this stack do something different. So yeah, we can listen to the first stack like this. Really simple 2-to-1 ratio, and it's just like a sharp attack. And then we can mute that one and then listen to the other stack. We have one side that's just doing this sound, and then the other side that's just doing this sound. And then put together. So the way that you should approach these kinds of algorithms where there's multiple carriers, just think of them as 2 different layers to your sound. I think that's the most important thing to consider when you're looking for an algorithm to use. Look at how many carriers there are. And if you see in something like this one, that there are 3 carriers, but 2 of them, there's no FM going on at all. There's only one stack of 2 operators, and then these 2 operators, there's no FM going on. It's just going to be the sine waves. This might not be super useful for, for something that you're thinking of doing. Like, you'd have to think, what am I going to use 2 straight up sine waves to do? So yeah, I wouldn't get too hung up about choosing which algorithm you're going to use. Just check and see how many carriers there are, and then think about what kind of sound you want to make. I would say that this algorithm is the most versatile. It's simple, and you can wrap your head around it pretty easily, and you can get a lot of cool sounds out of it. When you get into the algorithms that have multiple modulators and one carrier, or some sort of iteration of that kind of structure, those are for pretty specific applications. For instance, if I have an algorithm like this with one operator modulating 3 carriers, I can do kind of like formant sounds. So yeah, that's kind of, you get like the ya sound. And basically what's happening is I have the lone modulator is at a ratio of 0.5, so it's really low. And that's kind of giving you the bass pitch of the voice in like formant terms. And then you have these 3 operators. 2 of them are at high ratios, so those represent the formant peaks, the formant frequencies in the spectrum. And then this one just kind of gives it a little bit more body. Yeah, so this is providing, like, the modulator and then this carrier A are both providing the bass pitch of the formant, and then these 2 are representing the formant frequencies. So you can experiment with some really high ones. When you go above like 15, it still kind of sounds like a formant, but it sounds I was gonna say it sounds more unnatural, but all of this sounds quite unnatural. But anyway, what I wanted to show there is that this is a very specific kind of use case, and then so that's why I would use an algorithm like this. But for general purposes, you might just want to start out with a simple algorithm like this, and then see, okay, what do I want to do here that I can't do with this algorithm? And then look and see if, like, maybe this one makes more sense or whatever. Something like this, where it's just for 4 carriers, I never use something like that. I don't find it useful at all, really. Some people say, oh, well, you can do additive synthesis with that because it's literally just adding sine waves together. I think that I have too much respect for actual additive synthesis than to disgrace the name of additive synthesis by using this for it. Let's just say that. But yeah, I wouldn't put too much stock into what algorithm you're going to use before you start. Just kind of pick a simple one and then see where it goes from there. And then it's always fine to just, in the middle of a patch, try out another algorithm randomly and just see what it sounds like. That's pretty much how you learn how to pick an algorithm, is just by experimenting. But yeah, the most important thing to take away, I think, is how many carriers the algorithm has. Okay, so now I have some drum sounds in a drum rack, made entirely out of operator voices, and let's just listen to how it sounds. So it might not be what you'd expect from FM drums. Sounds kind of 909-y almost, with like samples. Sounds like a 707 sample. I think this one was it. Yeah. Anyway, so let's just go through these individual drum sounds. All of them are just made with very basic FM synthesis, only sine waves, and just, pretty normal bread and butter types of like methods. So let's look at the drum. Let's look at the bass drum first. This is my favorite algorithm for bass drums. Like I said, it's super versatile, and that's because you get 2 layers. So you get one for the body and then one for the transient, and that's literally what this is. So let's listen to the body first. It's a 3-to-1 ratio. So let's just listen to the carrier first. It's just a sine wave with a pitch envelope. And then to give it some more body, I did a ratio of 3. It's really subtle. It sounds like a little bit of like overdrive almost. Like that. And actually, a ratio of 2-to-1 is really good for overdrive-like sounds because, like I said before, like we learned before, it turns the output waveform into kind of like square, a soft square, and that emulates the sound you get from soft clipping in a distortion circuit. So let's just listen to how that sounds. If you close your eyes, it kind of sounds like it's overdriving. You know what I mean? So that's really nice. Also, ratio of 3-to-1 is good too. Like for when you, like I said before, for when you want to retain definition in the low end, use lower ratio settings. So that's the body of the kick. Now let's listen to the transient. So that's literally all. That's literally all this side is doing, and that plus the body sounds like this. And without the transient, it sounds like this. So very, very simple. And the way that I did this transient type section is I have this carrier giving a really short decay. And then I have the modulator pretty high, and then the feedback is all the way up. So that's what it sounds like when the carrier has a longer decay. All I'm using this sound for is just the very beginning of the kick drum to give it some more snap. So that is a very simple configuration, and it makes a pretty good kick drum. So let's move on to this clap. This one's a bit more complicated because I have some modulation, some external modulation going, but you can usually do something like this in an FM synth, like the Digitone or something. So again, I have this this double stack of 2 operators. Let's just listen to this first section first, and that would again be like the body of the clap. So that makes up the bass for the clap, and then this section up here again makes up the noisy part of it. So let's listen to that. And all this is, well, you usually can't go up to a ratio of 41 in most FM synths because that's just kind of ridiculous. I'm surprised that they let you do that in Operator. But again, it's a similar thing where I have the modulator. The feedback is set to 100, so it gives you a really noisy sound. You really don't need this. Let me see what it sounds like. Yeah, so literally it didn't even matter. So basically it's just the same thing. I have the modulator, the feedback is set really high, and then that's just giving you noise pretty much. It's giving you FM noise. And then to make it sound like a clap, I have this MIDI shaper, which I just drew in a ratchet because I didn't know how else I would do that in Ableton. I'm still pretty new to Live, but without that, it sounds like this. So it gives a nice ratcheting kind of sound, and put together, it gives you a clap. So you can do this really easily with LFOs. For instance, in the Digitone, it has an exponential envelope LFO, and you can just repeat that, and then it makes a really good ratchet sound. So that's how you make clap sounds with you always need a ratcheting envelope for claps, just because that's the nature of it. That's what gives it its characteristic sound. But you can apply this same logic to a snare drum. I don't really like using snares, but it would just be the same thing. You would have the body with these two operators. You would give it a pitch envelope, and then you would have a noise portion of it. And I've done all of this with just sine waves again. So you can do all this with a very simple and basic FM setup. So let's listen to the hats. So for these hi-hats, I have a stack of 4 operators, because the more operators you have in a stack, the more like metallic high-end and atonal stuff that you can get. So I have this first operator. Let's just listen to that. That's just giving like the bedrock for all of this modulation to happen, pretty much, because the modulation is what's giving this the sound. And in fact, I'm not even using this last operator. It's just a 3 operator patch. So let's listen to the first operator. So that kind of gives like the shape of the symbol. You can think of it as like what kind of symbol it is. And the way that I've achieved this is by using a fixed frequency. Instead of being a ratio of the MIDI note that you tell it to play, it plays whatever frequency you dictate it to play without changing like up the keyboard. That might sound a little confusing, but really all you should take away from this is that this is not a pure ratio. It's free running, so the sidebands that it generates aren't going to be in the harmonic spectrum, and that's important for a lot of percussive sounds, and especially cymbals. And then I have this one. So I guess I actually lied. I did use a waveform that wasn't a sine wave, but let's listen to how it sounds with a sine. Yeah, the 16 harmonic saw wave sounds a little bit brighter, but we can just do the same thing with a sine. It sounds fine. So again, I have this operator at a fixed rate, at a fixed frequency, so not a ratio, and then I have it going really high. So with the ratio, or with a frequency that high on this modulator, it serves the purpose of making it noisier. This modulator kind of gives it the metallic bass, and then this one imposes noise on top of that. And then this part is probably the most important part of this sound, is that we have a high pass filter, and this is. I'm kind of a purist when it comes to FM. I don't like to use filters. Like, I don't really like the idea of making a harmonically rich sound and then just filtering it out. I like the sound that FM makes when you use it on its own terms, in terms of like taking away harmonics, so reducing the modulation level. But filters are really helpful when you're making drums, especially and especially hi-hats and cymbals. So let's listen to how it sounds without this high pass filter. So it still sounds metallic, classic FM metallic type sounds, but being able to filter out all this unnecessary low end is really important for drum synthesis when it comes to FM. And most FM synthesizers nowadays have filters with each voice. So, you know, when you go back to the 80s synths and stuff like that, you might need to use a mixer board to take away the lower frequencies. But for this one, we just have a filter built in. So it retains that kind of metallic signature, but being able to filter out the unnecessary lower parts of the sound make it really good for hi-hats specifically. If you're doing like a crash cymbal or a ride, you might want some of this low end. But hi-hats, in my opinion, need to be pretty high-passed. And this weird like 707, it's like a 727 whistle. Yeah, it sounds like one of those like Latin drum samples. I don't really think we need to go into this. It's just random, but these ones are kind of like toms, I think. I'm not going to go super deep into the specifics of both of these sounds, but basically you can kind of see the pattern. I have these operators running at fixed frequencies, so the sidebands are not going to be in the harmonic series, but they're going to be spread out in a different way, and that lends itself well to percussive sound design. And then I have a pitch envelope going. So making non-specific drum sounds like this with FM is where you get to just kind of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. Generally speaking, fixed frequencies are good for this kind of sound design, or at least just ratios that are off and not perfectly multiples of the fundamental frequency. And as you can see with this one, I only have one carrier, and then these are just 3 random frequencies pretty much that are modulating this carrier. So it kind of gives you three bumps in the spectrum, and then with the amount of modulation, it generates even more bumps above those. Yeah, FM drums are really fun to experiment with because you can just do random shit like that. So this one sounds kind of more... This one almost sounds kind of like an FM version of a 909 drum or a 909 tom. So it's the same deal. You got fixed frequencies, and you just dial it in to see what kind of sounds you can make out of it and what sounds the drum track calls for. So all put together again, it goes like... So yeah, it's fun. Okay, so for my final example of how to use algorithms, I'm going to just show some dub chords that I tried to make. So let's listen to this one. So on this one, I've given the carrier a little bit of attack, so it's not super poignant. A really small amount of attack, just so it's not as like snappy. And then I have this one at a ratio of 2 and coming in kind of gently. And that remains throughout every iteration, I think, yeah. So that forms the basis of this patch, and then this operator is also modulating the carrier separately from this one. And it shows that I have... Let me see. Yeah, I had this one turned on, but it's pretty subtle. Yeah, it just gives it kind of a gentle, kind of overhang. This one is where the movement comes in though. So this I have a sharp attack and a pretty fast decay. It's at a ratio of 6, so it's going to bring in a good amount of high end. But importantly, I have the LFO modulating the volume of it, so the overall level. It's a really slow LFO, so it comes in kind of sparsely, and that's important for dub techno chords to kind of give this continually evolving sound. So most of the time it's going to be kind of a slow attack. The chord kind of just comes in gently, and then sometimes it's going to give you a more like stab. So when you send that to a delay. It just gives you some interest every once in a while. So there's number 1. And then this one's the same basic idea. You have a kind of base amount of modulation, which is these two. And then this one, as you can see, the LFO is modulating this, and it just kind of brings in more high end periodically. So yeah, it brings that high end in and out. And then this is a ratio of 0.5, so this is going to give it a lot more bass. And as you can see, this one is directly modulating the carrier. So you have these two modulating the carrier separately, and then this one modulating the carrier. And this is also kind of being brought in and out of intensity. So yeah, there's a bit too much going on in this FM patch for dub techno, but you get the idea. Approaching algorithms pretty much boils down to using your envelopes well, and then also seeing how many carriers the algorithm has, so you can determine how you want to use these different stacks. If you want to layer them up, like in this one, or if you want to have a lot of modulation going on at the same time, and then having multiple modulators on the same carrier also gives it a kind of layering, but it just gives you less control over each of the layers because you're stuck using one carrier, but it can give you some cool sounds. Lastly, I just wanted to show a couple of tips and tidbits that you might find interesting with regards to FM. So we learned how to make a square wave and a saw wave in FM, and now I'm going to show you how to do a triangle wave, but this is a bit more rare because it requires negative amplitude and negative modulation, and most FM synths don't have that because it complicates things. It's not really a point in most cases, but something really cool that you can do with it is make a triangle wave. So let's see how that works. So I'm starting out with a sine wave, of course, and you see that I have these controls set to bipolar. This is the modulation, amplitude, and the feedback. So I'm gonna bring the amplitude down a little bit just so you can see what it looks like. So this is a ratio of 2:1, and the amplitude is negative. So I'm going to go back positive for a second to see what it looks like. And you see we get that classic soft square that you get with a 2:1 ratio. But if you go negative, you get a soft triangle, sort of. So that's strange, right? I don't know, maybe you wouldn't expect it. All right, now I'm going to show you just positive modulation, and I'll go feedback positive and negative so you can see what that looks like. So it sounds similar, but there's some slight differences in the spectrum. As you can see, the positive feedback kind of squares off the top, and the negative one kind of brings the top inward a little bit, kind of like a triangle. So let's apply that to this little like soft triangle thing that we have going on. So this is just a tiny bit of negative modulation, and then you take a tiny bit of negative feedback. And you get a pretty decent triangle wave. And again, this is very, very rare in FM synths. I think that one of the old Yamaha synths, I think it's the SG77 or something like that, they can do negative modulation and feedback. But one interesting newer one is Gem from Fours, and this is part of a Max for Live device that's called Opal, and it's a drum synthesizer, and it has 4 different synth tracks, and an FM synth is one of them, and it's a 2-operator FM synth. But interestingly, it has negative modulation and negative feedback, so let's just try and recreate it here. I'm not going to play the audio, but just show you what it looks like. So yeah, kind of just like a little random fun thing. If you ever venture to program your own FM synth, this might be something that you consider. Making it more complicated isn't necessarily a good idea, but you can do interesting things within limited control ranges. And actually, the Model Cycles has a little bit of this too on its kick engine. So yeah, just a fun little tidbit. You can make a triangle wave with FM, and you can also do pulse width modulation, but I'm not going to show that now. It's more complicated, but yeah. Now I'll give a little advice on using non-sine waveforms. I think people have the impression that, sine waves back in the 80s, they were so simple, and now we've moved on from that, and we can use any waveform that we want for FM. And that's not a very good mentality, in my opinion. I think it's because people think that FM is frequency modulation instead of actually being phase modulation. But there's no reason why you can't use non-sine waveforms. It's just that the best results come from waveforms with very limited harmonics. So additive synthesis is a really good complement to FM. So when you look at an FM plugin like FM8, you'll see it has these other waveforms. Let's look at this triangle. But if we look at the spectroscope, you can see it only has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 harmonics. So it's not a full triangle wave. It's very limited. And let's look at the sawtooth also. You can see it only has 16 harmonics. So, real sawtooths and real triangle waves have a lot more than that. This waveform, it doesn't have as high of a resolution, but you could see that it would have a lot of curvature in the phase. In fact, there's one this is a saw wave with 3 harmonics, and it actually looks kind of similar to modulation at a 1-to-1 ratio with just a little bit of amplitude. But yeah, this has 3 harmonics. The waveform is very curved, and this kind of stuff is best for if you're going to venture out of sine waves with FM. And you can see there's these other ones with harmonics that are at specific intervals, harmonic intervals. And it also has the TX81Z waveforms, which are kind of fun. These, should I explain in detail? I don't know. These basically, with how FM works in those old Yamaha synthesizers, it made sense to implement this kind of waveform because the sine lookup tables that they used were a quarter wave, and then so they could just instead of repeating it in the same pattern, like quarter wave this way, and then the negative portion, they could just read it back in a different way, like this. Yeah, it just gave you a little bit more variation. So you could generate higher harmonics without using multiple stacks of operators. That's not as flexible as using stacks of operators because, again, you can do different things with those with the envelopes. So you could, it doesn't have to be a static, just a static level of higher order harmonics. But as you can see, these still have very limited harmonic content. So these kind of things are best for if you're going to not use sine waves in FM. And the Digitone has a really good implementation of this synthesis, because it actually is just additive synthesis. I think the max amount of harmonics they used were 16, and then they were parameterized, so you could sweep through. I'm pretty sure it was a wavetable that they composed with additive synthesis, because that would be more computationally cheap. You can sweep through the different harmonics, which is nice. I always prefer when things are parameterized instead of like selectable, if that makes sense. So I think that was a good design choice. I don't know if there are any other FM synths that have that are popping out to me, but yeah. So that's a brief treatise on non-sine waveforms in FM. Now I'm going to recommend some good FM synths. This FM8 is a good plugin. It's very flexible. You can route things in a lot of different ways. So it's fun. It's very complicated though for a beginner. But I think it's a good implementation of FM. There's not a lot of FM synths that do this, that have a modulation matrix for the operators. Another good one is Glanta by Force, and in fact every single thing by Force is very good and high quality sounding, and they have good interfaces, so I would highly recommend those. They're just doing something new, and it's good to just see somebody who's not constantly reiterating past synth styles and just I think we should be done with remake culture. I think that should be over with. Anyway, so this is a 2-operator FM synth, and it has some interesting quirks. It has cross modulation between the operators. It has both positive, negative feedback on both the operators. And it has this interesting stereo function where it shoots the... Yeah, so I think what it's doing is it duplicates the modulator by 2, and then it offsets the phase of one of them, and then it has that modulating the carrier on both the left and the right. So I think that's what's going on. But it's just a nice little stereo addition. And yeah, very simple, and just sounds really high quality. So I would recommend this one. Another one is this whole device Opal, which I mentioned earlier when I was briefly showing you Gem. This is also, it's similar to Glanta, but it has negative modulation, which is nice, and it's just more tailored for percussive sounds, which is cool. The phase actually starts quarter wave, so you always get this pop. Which I really like the sound of that, and it helps with percussive sound design. So it also has this noise, which is cool. And it is FM noise, but it's actual FM noise, not phase modulation feedback noise. It's noise modulating the frequency of the whole thing. So it sounds really cool. It's nice to have noise that's not just feedback noise as like another layer that you can add on and use feedback in a different way at the same time if you want to. Everything in this device is really nice, so I would recommend that for sure. If you're into old school vintage lo-fi FM sounds, this company Plogue is really, really good for that. They have a Genesis / Mega Drive emulator and the Porta FM emulator, which is a really fun, what was it called? Yamaha Porta Sound, which I believe was a 2-operator FM synth, which is pretty rare, and you couldn't edit the parameters, I don't think. It just had preset sounds, but this one you can edit the parameters, and their stuff is very, very meticulously reverse engineered, so they get everything pretty much bang on in like the emulation of the sound. They call it bit accurate emulation, I think. This one's nice because you get 2 layers, I think, and then you also get a drum synth with it. And then the Mega Drive one, it just sounds really, really good. Good as in it sounds bad because it's emulating the Genesis / Mega Drive, which was notoriously lo-fi. The quantization noise in it is really like vivid. Even though I just said I wish that we would stop constantly reiterating the past, it is nice to have these classic sounds, and I actually do love I do love like remakes of things. when it comes to synths and stuff, but I'm just tired of everything just being that these days, it seems like. Anyway, this company is a good one, and they have non-FM stuff too, if you're interested in that. So, and of course, as I was making this video, the new Digitone 2 dropped. It looks really cool. I would still recommend the first Digitone if you're only interested in FM stuff, because it's a really high quality FM synth. And it's... the way that things are parameterized are nice. It takes a little bit of a different approach, but you still have the kind of classic FM like approach to it, which is cool. And I just really like the way that the old one looks with these different color keys. I know that a lot of people didn't like that, but it's kind of sad to see the new one omit that, but it still looks really cool. So yeah, the old school Digitone is a nice FM synth. Even though the new one will have an FM drum machine, or an FM, like, you know, a machine that's specified for FM drums, the old one, you can do really good drums with it. You get the 2 LFOs, and there's a lot of really good drum patches already out there that you can download for it. And my favorite drum machine pretty much of all time is the Model Cycles. I think it's just kind of perfect, to be honest. I love how simple it is. I love the way it looks. I love how light it is. Everything is parameterized really well, and it's really one of a kind. You know, nothing else. There's no other FM drum machine, and it's really nice that the parameters are really narrowed down and zoomed in to certain kind of ranges with FM. They keep you in a sweet spot, and you still get a lot of flexibility with what you can get out of them, but it's just cool to see something like this. I guess that this whole recommendation section is pretty much just a hagiography of S. Madison, but I think that I just am really inspired by his work, so I have no problem with gassing him up a bit. And actually, something interesting is that these controls are usually macro controls, controlling multiple parameters at once within like the FM structure, within like the, you know, under the hood. So I just really like approaches like that. I think it's inspiring. I think that more synthesizers should be made like that. You know, every implementation of FM doesn't have to be this classic reinterpretation of the Yamaha approach, because that was just one interpretation, right? There's a lot that you can do with FM. There's a lot of ways that you can implement it and make it easier for the user to get something going quickly with it. So that's why I really like the Model Cycles. It's my favorite drum machine. So yeah, that's all I have for this video. I hope that it was informative to people. If you have any questions, let me know. If you have criticisms, if you think that I, you know, didn't explain something well, just let me know. I'm not planning on being a YouTuber, so I don't really care, you know, about if this video gets shared or liked and whatever, but I guess it would be nice if more people were able to be exposed to it. So yeah, so thank you guys for watching.